Hello, everyone. Welcome to another awesome Carolina Snowflake Meetup Group events. Tonight, we will be going over Terraforming Snowflake. Very exciting. I'll just go over our meetup rules real quick. We just ask that everyone's respectful of one another and tries to stay on mute and use the chat to ask questions and try to keep those questions on the topic. Video on is optional, and we always hope that you will recommend us to someone and invite a friend and ping us on Twitter at Data Lakehouse. Our previous meetups are added onto our YouTube channel, and you can find that YouTube channel in the discussion board on our meetup group. And today we're going to start with some introductions, a quick Snowflake refresher, and then an introduction to Terraform. We'll go over a couple use cases, and then we will jump into Terraforming Snowflake, and that will go over the Terraform plan and the demo itself. And then we're going to talk about our Snowflake health checks and what we've got coming up next. All right. So I think Mike is going to take this section.
Yes, absolutely. So just a refresher for those that don't know what Snowflake is, or maybe you're new to Snowflake. So Snowflake, commonly referred to as a Snowflake data cloud. It's more than just a cloud data warehouse where you ingest your data, govern your data, access your data, but you also share your data. There's a lot of means to take your data that you have and potentially anonymize that and make that an asset that you share and charge to perhaps your customers as additional service, or maybe it's a part of the overall relationship that you have with your customers to make it easy to transfer and share data. They don't have to be a Snowflake customer, but they get to leverage the power of the Snowflake data cloud, of course, if they are. So lots of different types of data sources, on-prem, cloud, third party. I think of flat files, device data, and whether it's IoT or perhaps network devices. And all that data can go up into the Snowflake data cloud, where you transform that data into how you need to consume that data, whether that's through your data scientist, your executive users, your end users through your organization, or perhaps other applications within your organization. You can aggregate that data, slice and dice that data, and carve out data sets to be exposed to the appropriate folks within the organization. So when you talk about today's conversation, all things Terraform, just to really set the, get everyone on the same page. When we think of Terraform as a whole, think of it as infrastructure as a service. We're using code in order to really create your infrastructure. The old way of having to go buy and procure physical servers, or perhaps you even had VMware or virtual servers that you were provisioning, had to determine, well, what's the RAM and the CPU and the shared disk and the type of NIC card or connection. Gone are those days where things from a software perspective, Terraform is the answer to that. And so there's two different flavors of Terraform. So there's Terraform, which is the traditional command line tool with we'll call it a quote unquote local install, whether that local install is on your laptop or a VM in a cloud provider. It still needs to have an operating system and location to run. Now with Terraform Cloud, this is when you think of, all right, we're going to have a team of people that are going to be doing infrastructure as a code. You want the ability to have that version control, whether you roll back and say, oops, I made a mistake, have that check in, check out, that CI/CD. Terraform Cloud is going to be your answer at that point. So we talk about some of the use cases, writing this code, especially repeatable code, where it's not, code to the nth degree where like, oh my goodness, I need a degree in reading and writing code. This is very, very straightforward. I think it was more, quote unquote, human readable. And we'll dive into what that actually looks like in a little bit here. You're able to, we talked about that committing of that version control. Another means to more the more modern way to handle infrastructure. All right, so Anupam, we'll turn it over to you here.
Okay. So yeah, thank you, Mike and Heather, for that amazing detailed introduction. So taking forward from here, we'll have a quick demo on how do we set up Terraform and how do we kind of set up Terraform from a Snowflake standpoint. So we'll first quickly talk about what are the various ways of importing infrastructure. So you could have like when you're completely setting up new infrastructure and you're bringing that under Terraform. Or the second scenario and the more tricky scenario is when you already have an existing infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, we'll only be keeping it to Snowflake. And when you already have an existing Snowflake infrastructure, and then you kind of want to bring that into Terraform. And we'll walk through each step around each of these steps, what it takes to kind of get your Snowflake objects into your Terraform infrastructure. So I did touch upon this, and if you go back, that there are two ways of doing it, that you could completely Terraform new infrastructure, or you could import existing one. And as Mike already pointed out, that there are two ways of terraforming. You could use something called as Terraform Cloud, which could give you a cloud interface UI to kind of set up a Terraform. Or the other option is to kind of use the command line option. And as part of the scope for today's session would be more around the command line piece. And what we've done is you have these set of registries or Snowflake providers for Terraform, which kind of give you certain scripts and certain commands to kind of import your existing architecture, Snowflake architecture, into Terraform. Okay, so this is one of the Snowflake providers that we have for Terraform. And as you can see, what they've done is they've given you like a Terraform script that you can kind of import as part of your code to import each of these objects. And as you see on the list, they give you resources for databases, functions, tables, external tables, file formats, masking policies, and most of the Snowflake infrastructure, each of them has their own transcripts. So if you click if you click the function, tells you what the format is. So if you have to import this particular object into your Terraform, we'll talk more about this as part of the demo, but this is just to get you a feel of what objects are available as part of this Terraform registry. You can have a look at this link. This is given as part of the presentation here. You can have a look here, and you can see that there are various objects that can be imported. So yeah, you need to kind of ensure that your code generates this format, and each of these parameters have to be kind of filled into for Terraform to know that you want to import this particular object with these properties. And it tells you the format, and it tells you what are the required parameters, what are the optional parameters, and so on. So moving on to the importing part, what essentially happens is that, so let's assume that you have a scenario where you want to kind of import your architecture, and it's a completely new implementation. You haven't implemented anything in Snowflake yet. So as you implement in Snowflake, at the same time, you generate a .tf file, which is nothing but your Terraform file, which has those resource scripts that I just showed right now. And then after that, you kind of do a Terraform initialization where you initialize the Terraform setup. And then you do like a Terraform plan to kind of create a .tf state file, which keeps a track of all the existing or all the objects of Snowflake that have been imported into Terraform. And then you kind of do a Terraform apply to create, edit, or delete any of the infrastructure from your Terraform and also your Snowflake setup. So let me do a quick demo here before I go ahead. So now let's take an example. For example, I have to import, let's say, databases. So for databases, as I said, I've used this particular provider, which is by Snowflake Labs. It just specifies the version that we've used. And then this basically gives you a setup to kind of connect with with Snowflake. So these are just the connection details with Snowflake. In this particular scenario, we've used a private key to connect with our Snowflake instance. And you need to kind of set up user. So we've set up something called as Terraflow Snow Meetup. So if I go to my, this is a Snowflake instance where we kind of set up the infrastructure using Terraform. So you see that we have a user Terraform Snow Meetup, and to that we've assigned like a public key that used to connect with our Terraform. And then you kind of assign the sysadmin, security admin for it to kind of go and create or remove or delete and so on. And then you would need your current accounts and your region information that you need to feed in here as part of the connection properties to connect Terraform with your Snowflake instance. So you can either use a password. If you have OAuth set up, you can use the OAuth token, or in this scenario, if you've used private key, public key, you can even use a public key and private key setup. You can specify the role that you want your user to use while logging into Snowflake. So in this case, it'll be using in sysadmin when it logs in at TF Snow Meetup. Now let's assume that now if you look at this Snowflake instance here in the databases right now, there's nothing. You just have the standard Snowflake database. There is nothing that is currently available. So first, let's assume that I want to create a database called as so let's say we take a name Ankit Sandbox, and I specify that you need to use this particular role, this user, when you're creating this database, and that's the name of the database. If you have any comments, your retention period. And if you want to understand what information needs to be passed on here, you can always look at the website. It tells you what parameters have to be passed here. So once you have a .tf file, a Terraform file mapped here, you actually go to command line, and then at first you go and initialize your Terraform. So I do a Terraform init. That, as you see, it initializes my Snowflake Labs library and the registry. And then after that, I do a Terraform plan, which tells me that based on the .tf file I've created, so it sees that what values are there in .tf file. It compares with the state file that we have right now. So right now, my TF state file has nothing. So it's telling me that I will go ahead and create this particular resource called as this database with the name Ankit Sandbox. It tells me that it plans to add one value, change nothing, destroy nothing. But it's important that with plan, it just tells you a plan and does not go and change or create or delete anything. It just tells you what changes are planned. So just look at this, what happens. If you look at the .ts state file, this is a state file which keeps a track of all the objects that have been imported under Terraform. So right now it's a blank file. It just had these initialize headers. It has no real resources under it. But when I go and I do a Terraform apply, it will tell me again that we plan to go and create this database, and you have to confirm with the value yes for it to go and actually go create. So I say yes. And now you see it has gone and created this particular database in my Snowflake sandbox. So now if you look at the .ts state file, it has added a resource called Snowflake database, the name Ankit Sandbox, with these attributes that we've provided. Now let's go have a look at the Snowflake instance. Now if I do a refresh, you see this particular sandbox database has been created. So Ankit underscore sandbox database has been created. And if you look at the history, you actually have this user Terraform Snow Meetup, which does do all these commands for you in the background. It does a check for all databases and then goes on to create a database for you. So it's done that creation of database for me in the backend, while I only had to go and add that particular command in my Terraform file. So, and that's the concept of something called as infrastructure as a code, where you only add certain configuration files, and then it takes care of creating, deleting, adding. So for example, if I want to go and delete this particular database, I can just say destroy, and whatever is created as part of Terraform destroy, it destroys everything. So if it again asks me to confirm, so it'll say that this particular database will be destroyed. So I say yes, and then it'll go and destroy this database for me. So I just do this value here, and it has dropped that particular database again. So if you look here, it should not be here. It's gone. So this is a scenario where you want to completely, you have something which is not there as part of your infrastructure, and then you go on to add it. And that is something which might not be possible every time. There might be some scenarios that you already have Snowflake objects in your existing architecture, and then you want to go ahead and then kind of in between, you decide to kind of import all those Snowflake objects under your architecture. So that means you would have to, so for example, if you have 1,000 databases, if you have 10,000 schemas, if you have, let's say 100 users, you would have to go manually create those resource files for each one of those Terraform objects. And then you will have to import each of those objects and then do a Terraform plan and Terraform apply, and then kind of implement that. And that is something which is not desirable. So there are two ways to go about it. Either you could write a script where you could automatically generate each of these files, and there is no existing solution per se as such. There are some ad hoc solutions that companies have kind of divided on their own to do it. But what we've done is, as part of Data Lakehouse, we are right now working with a feature. It's under private preview, and it should be out very soon on Data Lakehouse, where you only have to specify the name of the account, you specify the user ID, you specify your password of your Snowflake account, and you just mention that for which particular object do you want the .tf file and the import commands are to be created, and then you generate the Terraform scripts. So Data Lakehouse would go ahead, based on your existing architecture, generate those .terraform files and the import command files, and then you can just go and then import those commands into your Terraform. So how do you do that? So let's assume, I'll take the same scenario. I have the same scenario here, that if I go and say Terraform plan, and let's assume that we have this particular database which is already created. So apply, and then I create this. Now, this is a scenario where we have, so I will have to go and remove this value. So what it does is, I have tried to simulate a scenario where I already have an object in my Snowflake system, but it's not there in my .tf state file. So what I can do is I can just go and, so you have something called as import, where you can import existing architecture into your Terraform file. And then you go and import that architecture. Your import has happened. And then after that, if I do a Terraform plan, it tells me no changes, because by importing that object through the import commands, it kind of matches your Terraform state file with the existing database or the existing architecture that you have in Snowflake. So if there are any questions around it, I feel happy to take it now. And I think, Heather, back to you.
All right, so we've had a number of questions come in through various means, and some of them, I've seen a couple of questions just around, you know, where can we find the recordings? So within the chat within Zoom, now there's a link there. There's also a within the Q&A area within the webinar. There's a response in there, and generally, if you haven't seen either of those places, our YouTube channel, which you can get to via our website on datalakehouse.io, is an alternative way to get to these recordings. Yeah, just some conversations just around maybe a deeper dive into Snowflake. What is it? Happy to have some follow-up conversations with those. Feel free to either reference the email address within Q&A, or you can there's a contact us on our website. Happy to dive further into Snowflake, do a demo, talk about your specific use case, and go from there. And of course, all free for those conversations.
Okay, great. So we've got these next steps here. First would be to start terraforming your Snowflake. If you have Snowflake and you need to use Terraform, of course. We also encourage you to explore Snowflake objects, and Anupam can probably comment more on that. And then create and manage org accounts in Snowflake, and let us know if you need any assistance. Anupam, do you want to touch on the Snowflake objects?
Yeah, I think to kind of fully unleash the power of Terraform, it's also a useful initiative to kind of understand the various Snowflake objects and how they kind of interrelate with each other. So while you're trying to import the Snowflake architecture into Terraform, there's a certain sequence that needs to be followed. So that ensures that you have smooth transition into Terraform. So understanding Snowflake objects and the kind of connection between each of them is definitely a useful initiative and useful piece of effort.
Great. We've got another question here. Does Terraform support adding multiple Snowflake accounts?
So I think when they say multiple Snowflake accounts, I think we're trying to look at if you have multiple Snowflake accounts and you're trying to import them under the same Terraform architecture. To answer that, yes, it is possible. You'll have to create different users for each of the Snowflake accounts that you have, and then accordingly manage it.
Awesome. Great question. So just to tell you guys a little bit about us, we are AICG, developers of the Data Lakehouse platform. DataLakehouse.io is our site where you can find out more information about us. And we are essentially an end-to-end analytics SaaS platform with ELT, machine learning. We offer analytics dashboards and a data catalog, and all of it with no code. So check us out on our site if you have any interest in learning more about Data Lakehouse. Right now, we are booking health checks for snowflakes, where we will check through everything and let you know best practices and that kind of thing. So if you are interested in that, I can put the link for that out in the discussion board. And I will update that. And we have another question here. You support IBM Cloud.
Yeah, so Snowflake doesn't run in the IBM Cloud. Snowflake runs in the three most popular kind of clouds, the AWS, GCP, and Azure. However, data from data that sits on a share, regardless of where that data sits, can be ingested into Snowflake. What and could be flat file, could be database. So from that perspective, Data Lakehouse doesn't care where that data is, as long as we can get to it and it's in a format that can be ingested. You're good to go.
All right, another question here in the Q&A. When we create Snowflake users through Terraform, is it best practice to keep the password off of the source code? What do you guys say to that?
So there are two ways to go about it. If definitely, if possible, it's a good approach to have the one that where we've used the public and private key instead of connecting with the password. That's one thing. Or the other way, essentially, if you're going to use it as part of some CI/CD pipeline, you would have your password stored as secrets. So for example, if you have your Terraform set up as part of GitHub, you would essentially store your password as part of secrets. So you would never essentially hard code your password. You would use secrets, so it's easy to maintain. And it also kind of keeps some form of confidentiality around the password being used.
No other questions in the Q&A right now, but you can feel free to reach out through that account we have on here if you're interested in anything else. All right, we've got an upcoming event on Friday where we'll be going into maintaining a productive workforce and Data Lakehouse's solution to that. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It'll be at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. And thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate everyone coming and join us again on Friday, and we'll have some new events coming out shortly.